Welcome to the Great Things LLC podcast. I'm your host, Josh Meter. Welcome to the podcast. In today's episode, I'm really excited because it's going back to the roots. It's actually going back to my family's roots. My guest today is Samantha Bauer, who is my cousin. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Josh. I'm excited to be here.
I have a great affinity for this story because one, it's my cousin. She is absolutely amazing. And just to put it in perspective, we are connected through our great grandfather, DeWitt Kennedy. So on the Kennedys and the Meter side, it was Western Pennsylvania, big farm family. And DeWitt Kennedy was a lot of things. He was a farmer, he was a cattle trader, he was a pool hustler, he was a great man. But we have a very, very large connected farm family. And our family reunions at Uncle Bob and Aunt Joanne's, they could be 150 people. And I remember those days really fondly, Sam, with swimming in the pool and doing the egg toss and water balloons over the house.
Yep. Some of my favorite memories. You can't think about it and not smile.
No, in DeWitt Kennedy, he was my great grandfather. I was the firstborn great grandchild, so I actually got his middle name and I was born on Father's Day. So I had a real connection with great pap. And we'll get back to that. But to just put in perspective, we've come from a long line of entrepreneurs and self-made people. I know your folks were real estate agents and your dad's done a lot. Like our family has a big community presence in a long history of entrepreneurism.
Yeah. I mean, pastors, farmers, and small business owners, right?
Right. And so one of the things that really excited, me to share your story, Sam, is let's just talk about what you were going, because in a way you represent a lot of things. Professional women, moms, wives, church and community members. And let's start with sharing a little bit about where you were and kind of what made this change to bring you where you're at today.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of shared that backstory because I think our roots are definitely, they're deep, right? And so they've kind of led me where I am today. But I was climbing the corporate ladder. And that was where I thought that God wanted me to be. I thought, for sure, okay, I'm going to break the glass ceiling and I'm going to be the president of some big corporation. And I'm going to show my kids that mommy can do that too. And that it's not just a place for, old white men. And so I was climbing the corporate ladder and I was getting pretty close to the top. And I realized it's pretty stinky up there and maybe not conducive to the life that I wanted to have. And one of my biggest turning points that helped me realize that it was time for a change was whenever I was at Uncle Howard's funeral. So my Uncle Howard is Josh's grandpa, and he lived a really long life. He was 101 when he passed, right?
He made it to 101, yeah.
Yeah. So my grandfather passed away, I think 2 or 3 years prior to Uncle Howard. But in that like 4 or 5 year period, we lost all of that generation, at least for me. So my grandparents both passed, and then Aunt Dottie passed, and then Uncle Howard passed, and I think Uncle Tom passed after. So anyway, it was just like this couple years span where
we lost a whole generation.
Generation.
It was a big thing for the family.
Yeah, they were, to Josh's point, when you have a big family like that and a big farm family, big close knit, I mean, that you lose kind of like the rock, right? They kind of kept everybody together. And the Christmases, I remember Christmas spending at my grandparents' house, but I also remember being at Josh's grandparents' house. Like we just all kind of traveled around. And
it was literally over the hill too.
Yeah. It was less than a football field away.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that had kind of all happened in this period of time. And then when I was sitting in Uncle Howard's funeral funeral service though, I mean, it was beautiful. It was very similar to my grandfather's, where everybody was just telling these amazing stories about like these memories that they had with Uncle Howard and the things that he had done. And ironically, he had owned an insurance agency in his life, and it gave him the opportunity to serve his community really well, and to serve his church very well, and to be so present not only in his children's lives, but in his grandchildren's lives and in his great grandchildren's lives. And just sitting there hearing all of these stories was so heartwarming. But at this time, right, I'm working a corporate job. I hadn't really seen my kids, I mean, grow up from age 0 to 3 or 4, because that's
Yeah,
about how
and let's talk
kids
about
work.
that corporate job to put it in perspective, because it wasn't insured. So if you talk about glass ceilings in a typically predominant old white man field,
Yeah.
that's really where it was. In my background is I also took over my dad's agency and I was licensed to sell. So we have,
Yeah.
a lot of similarities there. So you were in a pretty big corporate insurance operation, and you were, I mean, just share about like the hours you were putting in too, because this is important. A lot of people grow in the ladder or going up the ladder put in a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was working 10-hour days Monday through Friday, and then Saturdays about, 8 to 3, because that's when the agents that I managed were working, and I needed to be there for them. So I managed a team of 80 insurance sales agents, and 5 insurance sales managers that all kind of reported through me. Um, And so it was a lot of hours. It was a lot of time. I was expected to be on all the time, and I traveled a lot. So, I mean, it was a lot. And it wasn't an environment where I could like bring my kids in and have lunch with them. I can't even imagine the looks on the faces if I, had done that on Saturdays sometimes, because I was the only one in the office that day. We'd bring them in, and that worked out really, really well. But um, my husband was a stay-at-home dad at the time, which was a huge blessing. But it still didn't help me to get to spend more time with my family. So that's the setting I was in. So I'm sitting at Uncle Howard's funeral, listening to these beautiful stories. And it was as though, I mean, people talk about these moments where they feel God speaks to them. And it might sound crazy, but I felt in that moment that God was like, "Hey, Sam, what are they going to say about you at your funeral?" And I mean, I sat there and cried, because I was like, this is not the path that I'm supposed to be on. Like,
Mm.
God didn't give me kids so that I'd never see them. Like, he gave me kids so that I could help be a part of their lives. And so it was then that I realized I really needed to make a shift. Um, I wasn't active in our church. We went to church, but Sunday was my only day off. So I wasn't able to like volunteer, or I really wanted to sing as part of the choir or whatever at my church, and I wasn't able to do that because I couldn't go to practice. Like, it was not fun. But I thought I was there, and I thought that maybe that's what God was using me, was to like, show my kids that this was okay. So I would justify it. I'm making a lot of money. My husband gets to stay home with the kids, so they're having a good, comfortable life. But I'll tell you what, since I've made the change and went from a really big fat salary to like nothing overnight, I would take no money and time with my family again, over and over and over again.
And it's amazing those big shifts. So we'll get into the process of going through that, but those big shifts just break your patterns and your assumptions, like, oh, you got to do this. You can get by on so little.
Yeah.
And while we all strive for abundance, it's not the end all be all. Like, having the priorities and the quality of life is where you really move to. And you did it really quickly. So let's jump into this story, because this is really, really impressive. One, not just from doing it, but to have like the faith and the trust in how the way you unfolded it in involving the entire family in supporting views. So you have this little aha moment, and what happens next? Like, how do you go from there to starting your own agency?
Yeah, so a lot of prayer and a lot of looking into different opportunities. It's Josh was also a part of this, because I've always admired you for your business sense, and your ability to, find success wherever you've gone, even when it's been hard for you. And so um I was thinking about buying a bed and breakfast, and I met with Josh, and he was like, "Yeah, Sam, you'll make like, if forget what the numbers were, but it was like if it was like 80% occupied, I would make $400 at the end of each month or something like that. And I was like, okay, that's not sustainable.
Yeah, and you
That's
also were, and the funny thing was in like the hospitality or those industries, it's just as much time. And that was one of your big things. You're like, I want more time. I'm like, probably wrong business to start
right.
up.
Probably don't want to be in a business that you have to live in and
Yeah.
do. And so it was you, like at the end of that dinner that we had, you were like, Sam, why don't you just open an insurance agency? Like, that's what you know, that's what you're good at. It's lucrative, long term. It's a great, thing to invest because of residual income. And I was like, ugh, do I want to be an insurance agent for the rest of my life? And then continued prayer, right? And things started to line up. So I own a franchise of a the biggest independent insurance agency in the country. And they had been reaching out to me actually for like a year before this. And me being me, I was like, oh, cool. I'm recruiting too for my corporate position. So let's be friends. And then if people don't work out for what you're looking for, you can refer them my way. And if people don't work out for what I'm hiring, I can refer them your way. And, maybe we can work out that way. So I kept this relationship with the lady that was trying to recruit me. And after you and I met and Rob, I reached back out to her and said, hey, what is this opportunity? Because I've never heard of this company before. I've been in insurance for a really long time. So it's odd that I hadn't heard of them before. But it was because they're pretty new. I mean, Goosehead's
Yeah.
been around for, I don't want to say for sure, but it's been like within like 15 years. Like it's not, and in Pennsylvania, I think for less than 10.
One of the things to help just bring the awareness a little bit to the audience too, in insurance, there's exclusive carriers and then there's independent agents. The difference is like the exclusive carriers are the ones you might know as like an Allstate or a State Farm. So when you're an agent, you can only sell their products. An independent agent can represent a lot of different companies and give your customers different choices. There's pros and cons to each. The one big challenge is starting an independent agency, because I went from an exclusive to an independent agency.
Yep.
The one big challenge is actually getting the appointments, because you have to bring enough flow of business to justify them putting you into their systems and giving you all the licenses. And and that is a pretty big barrier to entry for a lot of people going into insurance. So this company that you found already did all that, and they take on the other part is staffing an insurance agency, because you have to have someone to take all the calls and do all the policy changes. So those are the two big ones. This company, Goosehead, actually solved that for you, where they have the carrier appointments and they do the servicing. So you're really just allowed to sell, and that's how you
Yeah,
set it up.
it's an amazing business model. And quite honestly, had I been 25, I would have just started a scratch agency on my own and done it by myself. But being 38 and going from $150,000 salary to a zero, I needed to figure out what was going to help me grow the fastest, and get me back to, something that we can live on, and help my husband then move. Because Rob went back to work when I opened my agency. He was a truck driver by trade. He went back to work. And we knew that we didn't want to do that long term. We wanted to work together, which I know sounds crazy to like probably 75% of the people out there. But for us, it's a blessing that we've been kind of like working towards. And so this, I mean, I gotta tell you, in just over 3 years, we're almost at a $2 million book of business. And there's no way that would have happened if I would have started from, because I would have had like you said, I would have had like 2 companies to sell. I have 56 companies that I can sell for. It allows me to work for my clients, which is cool.
Yeah. So it's been 3 years. So you started and you got rolling. Let's talk about some of those challenges in those startups, because I mean that's quite a transition. And to put it in perspective too, with the whole global pandemic and childcare. I mean, you not only jumped into, like, you dove off the deep end in faith that it'd be okay, but you got You got hit with some big family things. You got hit with a global pandemic. You had a, career change, and now you're doing it all. And through this, you and Rob and the kids are all working together because you hadn't understand it. So let's talk about that first starting it up. Not the greatest timing.
Yeah, so I was doing this for about 6 months before, well, so my daughter got like deathly ill at the end of 2019. She got a complicated pneumonia that quite honestly almost killed her. We were in Children's Hospital for 14 days over Christmas, so we weren't home for Christmas that year. But this happened when my business was 6 months old. So my business was a baby. It was just starting to like get leads and really starting to like become something substantial. And she got sick. And I mean, even though we were only in children's for 2 weeks, this was like a 3-month ordeal because she was sick before we went in. And then once we went in, and she had 3 tubes put in her chest to get the drainage out. And so like we had a long recovery after that. And then right after, I'm laughing not because it's funny, but because sometimes you don't know what else to do. Right after we got out of the hospital, I had a miscarriage. So we just thought like, well, we've got, God allowed Andy to have her life. And then we thought we were out of the woods, and then we actually lost a baby. And it was just like, what is happening?
Mm.
But during this time, and then that was January, the beginning of February, 2020. March 2020 is when the kids came home from school and never went back for like 2 years. So yeah, it was crazy. But I will say, like, I was able to work when Andy was in recovery in the hospital. I was selling policies. Like I was able to go and sell policies while she was in there. I was bedside with her the entire time. Rob and I would trade off nights sleeping there. But had I been at my corporate career, I can't even imagine the stress that I would have felt during that time. I don't know if I would have had a job to go back to, in all honesty. And so this shift came, had I waited, and I can't even imagine. So then COVID happened, my kids were home, and I worked from home, and, we just figured it out, and they did school and I did work. And I think while the rest of the world kind of went on auto drive, I decided that I wasn't going to do that. I had actually read an article on Facebook that somebody had posted, and it was talking about how women can't do both. During a pandemic, it's no different than what they say out of a pandemic, right? You have to choose your family or your career, and women are having to quit their career because of COVID and with the kids. And it infuriated me. Like, it takes a lot to get me riled up, but I was so mad at this article because, like, why would you post an article that people can't do something? We should be rallying each other, supporting each other, and telling each other how you can do it. It might be hard, might be ugly, but if you really want to do this, you can. And so I drove my business grew 90% year over year. Obviously it was my first year, so that's not like a huge bar that was
Right.
set. Into year 2. And then the next school year, when they came back and said the kids have to wear masks all day, I just wasn't ready for my daughter, who had lung surgeries a few months prior, to be in a mask all day, to restrict her breathing even more than. So we just prayed on it again, because that's what we do. And I decided to homeschool them. So that second year of COVID, I don't know how we like put a time frame around that time, because I guess we're still kind of, I don't know, in it. But that second year of COVID, I homeschooled them in my office. So I would teach them from 8 until 10 every morning. And then they would do like independent work for most of the day while I was in here on the phone and selling policies. And it was crazy, but like I could have never done any of that.
And at the end of the year, you shared with me when we were speaking, like at the end of the year, the performance, those kids had to be tested and, share
Yeah.
about how they did with it too.
Yeah. So I'm not a teacher. I am also not, God did not make me to be a stay-at-home parent. Like, that's not the way that I was built. So I was super nervous about it, and I had no clue what I was doing. I bought this Montessori program that actually is amazing. I never even really knew anything about it. And that's what we use. But during the year, I'm thinking like, are they really learning anything, or are we just having fun? Because it definitely felt like we were just having fun. We did science experiments and played games, and I turned math lessons into like Nerf wars, and like we just had a good time doing it. But yeah, at the end of the year, it was amazing to see how much they had learned. And we put together these folders to show the evaluator, and we had all kind of photos in there. And it was just really neat to look back and see like, wow, we accomplished a lot, and even then to look at my business numbers and to see like, I never got out of the top 10 in the state for my franchise that whole time. And it was just like, okay,
Yeah,
we
you're
did
doing the
this.
thing. You're actually
Yeah.
doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. So huge blessing. And again, had I not taken that leap of faith and trusted, what I felt God was calling me to do, I don't know, I'd still be miserable at that corporate job and not very present.
Yeah. One of the things that's really impressed me about you is, first off, you come from a very rock solid understanding and guidance with your own faith and your connection to your faith. And you and Rob have cultivated that in your relationship, in your family. Um, when we were talking earlier, the thing that I absolutely loved is, and I'm going to take a quick aside here, like the image that's put out there, especially on women, that you can be professional and this, or you have to pick between home and family. It's not about, or for the stay-at-home dads as well.
Yeah.
It's not about picking. It's actually finding the right balance, and it's the choice. But you as your family unit really did that together. Can you share some of those discussions? Because I know 3 years, going back to the earlier point, is you made the commitment, you had the agreements, Rob picked up what he needed and went back into his work, but the goal was to get back to working together and building this together. And so talk a little bit about how you work that with your family, because that's beautiful. And then also what's happening today with Rob and his shift.
Yeah. So definitely, I will say too, in the last 3 years since I've done this, my faith has grown exponentially. I've grown closer to God. And it's just been, I think when you take these leaps and you trust him and you see that he's like really going to support you, it allows you to trust him more. So taking the small leaps and then like, whoa, this is working out. Doors are opening. The right people, are coming into my life. And then you continue to trust more of that comes. Like it just, and I don't know that it's like a reward, because God doesn't really work that way. But I do think that when you start to really lean into your faith and trust that you're going to get caught and that you're kind of listening to the Holy Spirit inside of you to guide your steps, and you take action on it, it just works. So one of the things that we do constantly as a family is we pray together. That's just, what we've always done. And when we made this leap, the kids were pretty little. They were, they would have been 5 and 6 whenever I opened the agency. And Rob and I had prayed about it a lot before we kind of made the decision. And then once we made the decision, we prayed with the kids. And we talked about the differences. Daddy was a stay-at-home dad, and now he's going back to trucking. Like he's going to be gone a lot. It's going to be mommy. And we clearly have I'll never forget the first time I stayed home with them, and they had it was breakfast, and they had come in and gotten these powdered sugar donuts and went and sat on my brown couch in the living room to eat them. And I was like, what's happening right now? 1, that's not breakfast. 2, you're eating powdered sugar donuts on my couch. And they're like, Daddy, let us do it. Oh, okay. So, and not that Rob is not a good,
He's an excellent dad. It's just the funny, the little things that you don't see when you were working,
Right. I'm like, this is why we have a table. So anyway, just certain things that with kids that little, it's important to eat at the table because they need to get used to eating at the table and having good manners. But my husband's also very structured, and I am not. So I swing by the seat of my pants. Rob literally sets timers to take out the trash and whatever it is he needs to do. And so it's a huge difference having mommy home versus daddy home, because we're polar opposites. But they did great with it. Andy probably took it the hardest. She's emotional, so she missed daddy every day. And she also liked to tell me what he like did better than me. And
Oh, good.
but
You need
that's
those
okay.
little reminders as you're
Yeah.
stepping into that, right?
Yeah. But I mean, the cool thing is I run this business so far, and I plan to continue to run this business this way, is that it is a family business and my kids are a part of it and they're welcome here. And it's their second home. I'm so sorry. I thought I turned this off, but apparently
That's right.
not. um, but so they, in my office, they have, if I could like turn the screen, you'd see there's a futon in here. There's all kind of like markers and kids. I mean, I homeschooled them in here. So all that stuff's in here. There are games in here, because they spend a lot of time here, but they also help me do things like they'll help me with my social media marketing. I'm sure you've seen posts with them in it. They help me put together goodie bags that I take out when I meet with lenders. They are a part of this business, and it's kind of been neat because I'm transparent with them. We've had to shift our budgeting for our household based on our income. And so my kids understand, like, a budget doesn't mean you're poor. A budget just means that we know how we're spending our money. And so like I've had those talks with them because I never want them to feel like, oh, I never want them to feel worried about money. I want them to understand mommy and daddy have control of our money, and we're making decisions as a family, and we're choosing not to, go to Disney World this year, and we're going to go to Deep Creek instead. Like whatever, those different levels of things are that we've had to do over the last 3 years, they've been a part of that decision making, and they know that we're growing because they're seeing a difference in our budget, and they know what our goals are for long term. And we talk about big dreams. We talk about, I lived in Japan for a year after college, and I talked to them about, I can't wait till I'm taking you guys there and we're going to eat ramen in the streets under a tent, like by a ramen truck. And so they know that stuff is coming, but they know it takes a lot of work and dedication to get there, and they're watching it happen. So
To see
that's
it
been,
happen, that's such a gift. And we do have so many parallels in our lives, being family and in the same industry at different times.
yeah,
And I remember one of the big lessons that was so important to me is dad was in insurance and he sold investments, and he talked about the investments with me. I really appreciate how you shared the process, and teaching your kids that hard work and savings and having a plan will get them there. But the gift that I got from dad was, I knew from day one that when I went to college, I had to pay for half of it. So he's like, you can get scholarships. I'm like, not getting athletic or academic for sure. You can take loans or you can save. And I started in seventh grade, and I'd clean his office, talk about the family,
yeah,
the business, right? So I go in and he's like, okay, you got to take half of whatever you make and put it in a mutual fund. I'm like, oh, I was really bummed that I had to give up this money. But it was in the 80s when the market was doing really well and I saw it growing. He taught me about investment. So then I saw how it worked, and I'm like, compounding interest. I'm like this little eighth grade investor, and I put my birthday money and my Christmas money in. And literally from seventh grade to 12th grade, I was able to save and invest enough to pay for half my school. And I had $770 left over, which I bought my first two suits. So like
nice. Yeah,
instilling like the not just work ethic, but the financial awareness and budgeting, and showing how sacrifice at one time can lead to bounty later is such a gift. And I think a lot of our kids out there don't get that opportunity to see basic money skills or finances. So what you've done there is amazing. Now you also mentioned 3 years ago, Rob went back to work, and the goal was
yeah.
to bring him back in. So let's share a little bit of excitement, and acknowledgement for what you and Rob have done together.
Yeah. So our goal was that at the 3 year mark, he would be able to quit his job and join the agency. And so I opened in May of 2019. May 31st of 2022, he quit his job. And so he took the summer off. I mean, off. He was really getting relicensed because he actually had been licensed in insurance like years and years ago, but let it lapse. So he had to get relicensed. So he got relicensed, and then he was home with the kids all summer, which was, I think, more than he bargained for. but but yeah, they went back to school a couple weeks ago. He's in the office with me now, all the time. And we're starting to build together, which is really exciting because when we set that goal, we kind of, when you're starting something new, you're kind of like, well, I hope this happens and we're going to work hard. And, when you set goals, you put down the numbers and I need to do this. I need to do this much action to get this many leads, to sell this many policies and get us there. And when I realized that it was happening, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. Cause that was our first big hurdle. Like that was our first big goal, was him coming into the agency. And then our next big goal is scaling. So over the next, 10 years, I want to hire 2 producers a year and, get to a point where we're able to share this with other people so that they too can have a life that they really love. Maybe, help some people get out of those corporate positions where they do have to choose.
Just to show them that there's an option there. And
Yeah.
you've done some really cool things on your marketing and how you've gotten your business to grow. But without going into the real specifics, the one thing that you've always been amazing at is your networking and your literally love of people. And so part of the Great Things podcast is dream, collaborate, create. So you had the dream, you've created it. But let's talk a little bit about the collaboration, because you found markets that would be good referral sources. You got into this business because of those relationships. And what I'm going to tie this into what you're doing with Wherever your podcast now. So Sam has started a podcast, Wherever You Go podcast. And this really, I think, talks to the spirit of who you are, because you want to show and share the gifts and the blessings that you have, and show people that there's other options out there and ways to do it. So talk a little bit about that place. And there's the other thing I'm going to throw. I know I've just thrown like 80 things at you. But you've done it in a way with some grace. You have the importance of self-care, and while there's still anxiety and challenges, you have a daily regiment. There's meditation and prayer, and like those are the things that I think are just amazing. So let's talk a little bit about your collaboration. You've involved different mortgage brokers. You've been active in the community. Let's just touch on that a little bit, and then how are you bringing your mission forward too with collaboration with others?
Yeah, so I love people. I think you hit the nail on the head. It drives my husband sometimes crazy how much I love people, because like he can't get me out of a room. But I love hearing their stories. I love helping them grow. I love figuring out, what can we do for each other that will result in success for everybody. And so this business model is so natural to me, because it's my whole business is built on partnering with loan officers and realtors. And as they have clients that come through that are buying a home and they need homeowners insurance, they have them call me, and then I help them out, save them money on their home and auto insurance. It's actually quite simple. But I think I've had so much success with these partnerships because I don't just like ask them to send me leads. Like to me, that's not fun, and I don't ever want to be like that person that's just always asking for things, but not being able to give back. So I've really built partners with people that I like. First of all, like I'm pretty picky about, I wouldn't say pretty picky, because I do generally like everybody, but if I get that feeling from somebody that maybe they don't do business the same way that I do, or maybe their values aren't the same, that might not be a good partnership, right? So I've been blessed by a whole bunch of partners who are just amazing people. They want to grow in their business. And so I think in any business that you're in, you need other people. Like you can't know anybody who says they're like self-made. That's baloney, right? We've all been a product of like the relationships that we have and the people that we choose to associate with. So I've really looked for ways to help them network. So I've found out that I'm kind of a freak and that I totally have no problems walking into a business, introducing myself, and trying to make friends with people. Most people hate that. And I've learned that through my franchise, because I train actually new franchise owners on how to do this, and they're all terrified of it. But my lenders also don't like it. And how they build their business is they build relationships with realtors. So they're super uncomfortable doing this. And it's something that I love to do. So I now do it with them. Like I'll call my lenders and be like, hey, you want to go visit realtors? And we'll go do it together. I did trainings last year for them on how to goal set, because I'm finding out that a lot of them don't have structure within their organizations that help them set their goals. I share their stuff on social media. I do everything that I can for them. And it's not just because I get something out of it. It's just because like, that's the right thing to do. Right.
Well, you love educating. I mean, even in your marketing, which is brilliant, is you're sharing information, and it's not about like, hey, success or buy this or save this. It's about the people and what you're doing for them, which is, a little piece of advice from dad. He's like, never worry about commissions. If you do the right thing, success follows. And
Yeah.
it's the greatest advice I'd ever gotten. And you're doing that. And I liked the piece that you had with the clarity of not all partnerships are going to be aligned, and it's okay. Doesn't have to be judgment around it. It's just not a match, and you move on.
Realizing that was a game changer for me, because I'm not gonna lie, like my first few like months, I would get like butthurt if people didn't want to work with me. I'm like, what? I'm really good at my job and I'm really nice. Like, why wouldn't you want to work with me? But then I realized that the sooner I let that go, and I'm like, okay, that's not my person, God's gonna put 10 more people in my path that are my people. And
Mhm.
so, if you sit around dwelling on that relationship that like that person doesn't want to work with you, or there's something that doesn't jive right, that's holding you back from what is for you. So the faster you can let that go and move on, like I learned, and it's so much less stressful. It's like,
Right.
all right, that person's not my person. I'm going to move on and find the next person who is my person.
That's right, because they're waiting out there for you to find them. The other thing, touch on this because it's really important, is you do have. I know you said you don't have a routine or you're not good at structure, but there are some things that are important to you, and I'm big on the daily habits and the rituals that we
Yes.
create the success for our days. So, what's a day look like in Sam's world?
Yeah. So I definitely, this is another thing I've learned. I'm telling you, I've like found myself in the last few years.
You
But
have.
I really have had to figure out what's important to me and make sure that I make time for that for myself. Cause this is how people get burned out. Right. And we kind of talked about the stress of feeling like you need to do self-care, and like, well, does that mean I have to like go, I don't know, do something special? But for me, self-care is just making sure every morning I get up, I do my Bible study, I do some yoga, stretch my body, I eat a healthy breakfast. And I just maybe I try to, I try to meditate for at least 2 minutes. And I know that sounds ridiculous because it's a very short time,
But
but
for
it's
you to sit
hard for
still for
me.
2 minutes really is a monumental achievement
It is.
because you're going.
And there are days that I'm like sitting there and in my head, I'm like, man, I stink at this, because I'm like thinking, and then I'm like, all right, this is not what meditation's like, not to tell you yourself that you stink at this.
Yeah, it's not a
Um,
competition. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And so, but when I do all those things, which I have now made, it's just part of what I do. I get up, I do that Bible study, I spend those silent moments, I stretch my body, I make sure I eat something healthy in the morning. It gets me going, and it gives me that me time. It's probably only 30 minutes total, maybe 40 in the morning. But it gets my day started off right. So I'm in a good headspace, going into the day. And
Mhm.
every time, when I sit there and meditate, that really is my time of silent prayer. I know different people believe different things, and so meditation is different for everybody. But for me, that's kind of like, all right, I said my prayers, God, I told you what I'm grateful for. Now I'm going to sit here and listen, see if you tell me anything. And some days he does. Some days, like, it's very clear that, like, oh yeah, this is the direction I need to be going, or whatever. Some days it is crickets, and those are the days usually that my mind wanders, and maybe I'm not in the right headspace for it. But it does. I used to think that stuff was like so woo woo and so out there, but it's really made a difference in my life, and it's given me, like I said, even those 2 minutes, like that's my time for me before my kids are awake, before the dog's like breathing right in my face, the stuff that happens once the house wakes up. I do all that in the morning, and I journal too, and journaling has been huge for me.
Yeah. You're doing all the right things. I mean, such a game changer if you can get into that morning routine. And a lot of people just fall into it. And I've single dad essentially, and like I know some of those routine mornings, like oh gosh, you got to get up, got to get everything done, got to get them out to school. But it doesn't take that much time or commitment, even taking 10 minutes to start with in the morning for yourself to have that quiet reflection. Really, really is a game changer. So, listeners out there, if you're not good on your morning routine, pick one out. It can be anything. You know, I like walking. You know, talking about moving your
Yeah.
body, like that is the quiet time and reflective time for me. So yeah, good on you for that morning. And you're talking about, you know, the big things in self-care. A lot of people like, well, that looks like a vacation or a spa. And we talked about that, which is really kind of funny. So you stress yourself out for half the year to save up the money to pack everything up to go for a week of intense relaxation. Then you're stressed to come back to the stuff that you didn't get done for the last week, where the daily and the small things are where the self-care really comes in.
Yeah. And I mean, we haven't done a big vacation for a few years just because, you know, of our financial situation with opening up a business. And we actually love weekend trips. Like we'll go to Oglebay for the weekend, or we'll go to Seven Springs for the weekend, or we'll just go up north, you know, and, you know, maybe camp or just for a day, you know, we might just go fishing or something like that. And like that stuff is so filling for your soul that, and it's not stressful because you just did it. And so we've
And a
actually
lot of
kind of
those things you
realized,
can do affordably too. You can,
yeah,
there's so many state parks, there's all these things. So getting away doesn't have to stress the household finances out. You can get real creative.
yeah. And it's like you said, you're not saving up forever and then spending and then like all the stuff. And when you get back, it's only been a day. So like you just feel refreshed. So it has been, it's been really, I've enjoyed this journey so far, and I'm excited, you know, to keep it going, see where it goes.
Well, yeah, I'm excited to watch you, and kind of wrapping this up with the journey and where it's going. So your business is growing, you got your family, you know, on board with it, and you're doing that well. What is next? You've started a podcast, you're getting back active in your church. So what has all this created, and what's next for Sam?
Yeah, so a couple things, I guess. Growing my business is super dear to my heart. Like you said, I feel a responsibility that once you figure something out, you share it with others, right? And so my goal for my business is to have 20 producers on board, including a babysitter that's here all the time so people can bring their kids to work, because that's what I did. And I don't want to not give that opportunity to the people that work for me, because it was such a game changer.
Mm.
So working on the culture and the environment is huge for me. We kind of talked the last time you and I spoke about the whole like quiet quitting thing. And as a business owner, that's terrifying to me. Like, I do not want to create a culture that people don't want to work their hardest in, or that don't want to come in and be a part of it.
Or
And
feel
so,
valued for their commitment and know that they're doing it for a reason. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I've been thinking a lot about that lately. And what are the things that we're going to make sure we do that make people want to work here? And Rob and I both have worked for corporations and worked for places. And we've learned a lot about what we did not like about those places. And so we actually started writing them down, because we're like, we're never going to make people feel this way. And so anyway, that's kind of where my business growth is going. I did feel called to start this podcast about a year ago, and I had no clue where it was going or what I was going to do with it. And then one morning in my Bible study, that's Joshua 1:9 popped up, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. You know, God is with you wherever you go. You know, don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. You know, don't. And it was just like the perfect thing. I'm like, this is exactly what I want to encourage people to do, is follow the dream that's in their heart that might be hiding under there, tucked away, covered up with self-doubt, or every person that's ever told you that you're not smart enough, you're not man enough, you're not, you know, you're too mom enough, you're too mom, whatever all those things that the world has told you why you can't do it. That dream is still tucked under there, and it's in there for a reason. It didn't, you know, it didn't, it's not there for nothing. You know, God
Hmm.
put dreams in our hearts so that we would pursue them. And I really want to encourage people, moms and dads. You know, I lean towards female because I am one and I'm experienced in that, but I definitely don't discount men. And I think that sadly, society has just accepted that men are going to work and not be as big of a part of the family. And I think that's almost worse than telling women that they have to choose. It's the acceptance that like, well, men are going to like, so I want men to feel empowered too, to follow the dreams that are in their hearts. Cause I know, you know, for my husband working those 12-hour days for the last 3 years, it was hard for him not to be part of things. And so anyway, so the podcast is growing. I just kind of do it, and they're 20 minutes long, and it could be a tip on goal setting, it could be a tip on growing your business. I just did a series on boundary setting, because back to that whole quiet quitting thing, I think if we can teach people how to set boundaries, maybe they'll have more integrity about not quite quitting, but actually setting boundaries and working really hard on the hours that they're working.
And
then,
from the employment side, you're also creating that container or that space where you're not putting anyone past their boundaries. Like, hey, we want you to work hard and be successful here, and you also respect the downtime. I think that's the backlash is from that corporate culture where you're just expected to be on call all the time, and then employees can't set boundaries. So it's kind of a two-part there, and you guys are taking care and ownership from the other side. Say, hey, we're going to give you an environment where you can be really successful. We want the best from you, and when you're not here, that's your time. So I love that it's that two-part connection with it.
Yeah. And teaching them, like, don't give your cell phone number out. Like, we have office phones. Like, that's what you use, because otherwise your clients aren't going to respect your boundaries, and they're going to be texting you on Sunday afternoon, and it's going to drive you bonkers. So we really, like, that's one of the things I really am going to be implementing as we hire, is like, here's how you set boundaries. And I actually just started with Rob yesterday, sharing some of the things with him. So anyway, that's that. And then my next thing is I want to write a book. And so that's kind of hopefully in the next year or two. I shouldn't say hopefully, in the next year or two that will happen.
Yeah. I know when you say hopefully, it means it's just on its way. So, and you've gotten some time for yourself too. You're singing, or you're active in the church again?
Yeah. So this is just, goes back to that funeral service, right? Like thinking like, man, God gave me a gift, and a voice to use, and I hadn't used it. And so I've been singing in our praise band at church and in the choir, and that's me time too. So when you talk about things that are self-care or whatever, I love singing. I love practicing with the band at church. I love being a part of that. And so for me, that's like a hobby that I allow myself to do. And Rob knows, like, Sam's got practice at 8:00 on Thursday nights at the church, and that's what she does. And that's awesome. And he has his stuff too. He does karate, and we know what nights he does that. And if I can find somebody to play tennis with me, you better believe I'm out on the tennis courts playing tennis. So it's making sure you're doing things you love too, because it's so easy as a mom or a dad to get sucked into your kids' lives, and you kind of lose yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, they're not going to be around forever. They're going to get, if you're doing it right, they're going to grow up and move out and become, contributors to society. And when that happens, you want to still know who you are.
Yeah, know who you are, have the health and the vitality and the connection and relationship to enjoy that. So,
yeah.
Well, I will check back with you here in the next year and be looking for your big book release party. I'm sure that is already in the works. Sam, thank you for taking the time today. If you're interested in learning more about Sam, or you're in Pennsylvania for insurance needs, check out the links in the bio, and definitely check out her podcast. So it's always great talking to you, Cuz. Thanks for being on, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks for having me on, Josh. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button right now. Stay tuned and check out the channel for other interesting and informative videos.